you folks for coming out on this chilly night. I think it's a perfect night to kind of get in the mood for fall and winter and the making of pies. Whenever I bring up pie dough or pie crust, a lot of people are really intimidated. And it really is so easy. It just takes a little time and a whole lot of love. It's really, really quite simple. And I'll actually, if someone wants to come up too, I have an extra set of ingredients and we can do it together. The Food Network and shows on TV are terrific in terms of bringing different foods to the public and getting people involved. They also do a disservice in terms of always having the most elaborate equipment, the latest, gadgets and technical things that you might need in the kitchen. The most important tools for making pie crust are your hands. It's as simple as that. So I also wanted to just let you know that I'm so used to doing big recipes at the bakery and using a scale with ounces that I failed to convert to tablespoons for you. So I'd be happy to do that too in terms of the butter and the cream cheese. Also, my recipe, which I've worked on for years, contains pastry flour, which I believe is fairly readily available at a store, perhaps like Vitamin Cottage, maybe even King Soopers. They have really nice selection now. If you're not able to get pastry flour, you can combine equal parts cake flour and all-purpose flour, okay? And the benefit to using pastry flour is that it's a higher starch content, but much lower protein. And protein produces gluten in the flour, which makes for the higher the gluten and the protein, the tougher the pastry. So you don't want to use cake flour, which has even lower protein, but pastry flour is just perfect. So another really important, Spencer, my assistant Spencer from the bakery is kind enough to help me tonight. I'm just going to have him grab some ice water. I just need 4 ounces. Okay. Another really important component of pie dough is you want your butter, and in my recipe I also have cream cheese. You want those really cold. So what I do ahead of time is I scale it out. And if you don't have an ounce scale at home, 12 ounces of unsalted butter equals 24 tablespoons. Thank you, Spencer. Does that help everybody? So what I do is cut it up into very manageable little pieces. And then you can either pop this in the freezer, in a freezer bag, have things ready. So if you have company coming or you are planning for the holidays, you have it all scaled out and ready to go. And this is just very, parchment paper used to be so difficult to find. That's also very readily available in the stores now too. And the cream cheese I don't necessarily chop up because it's a little more malleable than the butter. And it's very important to use good butter, unsalted butter. You don't have to use what they use on the Food Network, like Plugra, which is, $20 a pound or something ridiculous because it's from France. We have very good butter in the States, so you don't have to worry about that. So I don't know if you can see, but I've just sort of cut this up into very manageable pieces, okay? So I have my pastry flour in here, and I'm going to add my kosher salt. And kosher salt, are you all familiar with kosher salt? It's not the iodized, it's a little, I can pass it around if some of you are not familiar with it. But it is much coarser, and you don't need as much of it. And people sometimes think, oh, in a pastry you're going to add salt. You always need salt. It just pops the flavor of whatever you're working on. So half a teaspoon of this. And then in my pastry, I like to add a little leavening. I add baking powder, which gives it a little puff and helps it to rise and be a little more flaky. So I kind of get all my dry together, and with my hands, because this flour's been sitting since this afternoon when I scaled it out. So I just kind of work that in evenly. And then I'm going to add my luscious butter. And too, at the bakery sometimes I get people who are afraid of butter. Don't be afraid of butter. Butter is our friend. Butter is, you know, you don't need as much of it when it's good butter. So what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of working this. Do some of you have a pastry cutter at home? Sort of a, yeah, it's U-shaped with the handle and lots of, you can also use that. I just prefer, I just love doing this with my hands. But this is called cutting in. So you're coating the butter with flour so that it incorporates, your dough incorporates much better. Do you all bake pies at home or? Good, good. I'm hoping it's not a lost art. I worry about, I sound like an old fogey, but right? Good.
Now on the dried ingredients, can you sift them?
You can, but by agitating with my hands, you're essentially doing the same thing. You can whisk it with a whisk. I usually don't sift my pie dough. With cakes and things, certainly you want to incorporate some air. So, okay. And you can kind of, I don't know, I hope this isn't taking too long. But can you all see how this is coming together? Another thing too, and you'll see as we get closer to the end of mixing, people have a tendency to mix the dough just slightly longer than it needs to be mixed. And I'll show you when we wrap it, because if it's a slightly undermixed and you refrigerate it, the dough's gonna, how do I explain it? It's gonna absorb all the extra moisture in there and it'll come together in the refrigerator or the freezer. It's this little magic trick. So it's just kind of a very shaggy, I like to use that word, shaggy, if you can see that. You don't want any huge lumps, but you don't want it entirely mixed either because you're going to mix in the cream cheese. Okay. So I'm just going to crumble this in here. And don't use that stuff in the tub, the whipped stuff, you know. Just use the full-on, good, fatty, rich, delicious stuff. If you're going to make a pie, you might as well do it right.
Use a different recipe for savory pie?
I do. And maybe we'll do another class down the way. I do. I use one with, it has a considerable more amount of salt, some cornmeal. It has a little bit of sugar, but I also put some dried herbs and black pepper and kind of whatever you want. You can put some dried peppers, you know, paprika or chili powder or something. We sell a lot of quiche at the bakery, and people love that crust. And that crust does not have leavening, so it's going to stay a little shorter. So this is really coming together. I'm probably not going to want to mix it much more before I add my vinegar, and my ice water. Another thing to remember when you're adding ice water, if you do put ice in the water to chill it, you want to make sure you remove any ice cubes, because if there are cubes when you mix it, that water in the dough will evaporate in baking and it'll leave little pockets, little holes. And you know, I just think we need to get back to a little slower food and taking time in the kitchen and talking and, you know, talking with our families and kids and moms and dads, and this certainly allows for that. And this is also something that you can prepare certainly ahead of time. You can do big batches and wrap them really well, and then put them in a Ziploc bag and put them in the freezer. And then, you know, come Wednesday before Thanksgiving, you're not panicking.
How many pie crusts does this make?
You know, that's a good question. This is a fairly large, I would say, I don't know, maybe, we'll see when we roll it out. Maybe 6. So, can you see that, how that's really come together nicely? Okay. So I'm going to add my water, and no ice cubes. And it's better to err on the side of not enough, because you can't take it out, and you can't just dump more flour in to compensate for too much water. And you'll be surprised at how quickly it absorbs this. Now, vinegar is a great, well, obviously, and I got this at Murney's today. Have you all been to Murney's? It's great. It's a Gravenstein apple cider vinegar. And really, any vinegar will do. I've even been in a pinch where I've needed red wine vinegar, and it does fine. And it's not going to turn your dough red or mess it up or anything. But this is just really lovely and fragrant. And the cider is, the acids in the cider will help break down the proteins in the flour as well and make for a flakier, nicer, delicious crust. So I probably shouldn't just pour this in here. Pastry chefs were very, you know, obsessive compulsive and weird, and things need to be measured. So then I'm just going to toss this. And really that's all it took, was 2 ounces of water and 2 tablespoons, which is 1 ounce. I'm sorry?
How much is 2 ounces?
2 ounces of vinegar is 1 tablespoon. So I'm not, see how if I clump it together, it comes together? That's as far as I want to take this dough. So now, you never want to just roll this dough out. It really needs to rest. And that could mean resting in the refrigerator or resting in the freezer. So I made this dough this morning, and I'll show you how. So what I do, excuse my hands. No, I'm going to put it in some plastic wrap. And what might be easier for the home, you know, baker, is to do smaller little packets. So I just kind of, I mean, that would certainly be enough for 1 pie. And I just kind of gather this together. And if I am going to, you know, this has a fairly long shelf life, but if I am going to put it in the freezer, I'll always double wrap it, and then I'll put the date on it. in the freezer just so I know.
Is it ready to roll out when you take it out? And
Yeah, you certainly don't want it to let it come to room temperature, but I'll show you. This is just about right. If it's too cold, you have to work it too much before you roll it, which can make for a stiffer, tougher crust. So I can pass this out too, and you don't worry if you see some mottled fats in the dough, like that everything is not incorporated. It'll roll out just beautifully. Thanks, Midori. So I brought extra stuff if someone wants to make some dough or feel it, or you're more than welcome to do that as well.
it's the reaction of the water with the gluten that makes the crust tough.
Yes, I mean any time any liquid that comes in to contact with gluten will certainly have that react. That's why you don't want to overmix.
So I've never tried this before, but someone said to half your water addition and use vodka.
Yeah, and vodka has the same sort of reaction, and it evaporates, in the baking process.
Alcohol's gone, but
Exactly.
it doesn't make as much it doesn't react.
Exactly. And it can also act as a tenderizer too. That's what your vinegar is doing. So,
I believe the recipe that they were using did not use vinegar, so that two things going.
yeah, so you could try one or the other and see which one you like. So, another neat thing is, the beauty of making a pie, so many things have been handed down, through families. This was one of my paternal grandmother's pasta boards, which is, well, at least 70 years old. And I could be, thanks Spencer, I could be very wrong, but I think pies turn out better when they're made on this little board. This is my favorite kind of pin. This is a French rolling pin. Sometimes you can get tripped up on the handles, or if your surface isn't even, or there's something in the way. But this is just a great pin. I treasure this. I'll wrap this up a little later. So now I'm just going to show you how to roll out some pie dough. So at the bakery, one batch of, that we do at a time will yield about 6 of these bad boys. So we make a lot at a time because we like, and we like to have it fresh all the time. I also use this for turnovers. It's a great little dough for turnovers. Thanks, Spencer. So this is still cold. If the dough is room temperature and you're trying to roll it out, you will have to add more flour to the board to roll it out, which will also increase the toughness of the finished product. So you want it just cold enough. And I don't know how many of you have a bench or dough scraper. I use this for everything. Another thing too, you kind of err on the side of too much when you're rolling out as opposed to too little, because then you got to add and you have this weird little like monster looking Frankenstein. So without any flour, I just kind of work this a little bit. You don't want to work it too much, but so it's a little more malleable. And this is a great tool, this heel of your hand here. And I just kind of turn it so that it's this nice little ball. And then I always have flour handy. And I'm just going to dust this lightly. And then it's always nice to have a brush too for excess flour to remove from the dough. I don't want to spill that. So you always, when you're rolling out dough, you want to start in the middle and roll out. You don't want to start at an end. You'll have some funny little, it's just much easier to start right in the center and work your way out. And then just keep turning it. And this is great too. It gives you like really strong arms. And the more you turn it, see, you're going to have a very even, it's going to be really, yes. But if you have a big lump, you can just sort of focus on that part as well. And occasionally you'll get, like I can see right here, a little fat might be poking its way out. So you just want to be careful there to have a little flour. When it gets on your pin, it's kind of a pain then to get off. Okay. So I don't know, maybe that's I think it's a little less than 1/4 of an inch. I was never very good at math. So like I said, better to have a little bit extra, and then you can always save that and re-roll that with bake that with some cinnamon sugar. Cut little strips, and you can always use the scraps. You don't want to re-roll the scraps entirely for one pie, but you can incorporate some into the next round. So I always just fold the dough, and if there's any excess flour, just kind of get that off. And this is fairly typical standard. Some of the glass or Pyrex pans might be a little larger. So I'm going to lay the fold right in the center. And then just unfold the dough. Okay. And then this is important too. The dough doesn't naturally just fall into the little crevice. So you want to lift it up and kind of work it in. Otherwise, oh, and I should have shown you this. I'll do another little batch to show you something important too when you're rolling dough to prevent a lot of shrinkage. Because sometimes that's a problem. You roll this beautiful crust and then you take it out of the oven and the sides are kind of shrunken in. So just gently lift, and then I'm just gonna kind of poke the tips of my fingers in here. And kitchen shears, very cool tool. I'm just gonna cut the edges. And you can be really creative with your edges. You can do a lattice top. I really like crumble pies, so I tend to not do crusts on the top, but this also makes great. I was just talking to my staff at the bakery today. I said, oh, I'm gonna make chicken pot pie this weekend. So this would be great for, chicken pot pie. And look, it's not gonna be perfect, and that's the beauty of a pie. You're gonna have some irregular shapes. So then to make a nice little crust, I'm just gonna fold this under. so that it touches the inside of the rim. Does that make sense? And I'm just going to go all the way around. And you can never have too much crust. Although if you do have an excess and it's heavy, it can, in baking, bake down and break off in the oven too, which is not so great. But you just cover that with ice cream and then you're okay. I'm sorry?
It's called antique.
That's right. So once I get around to the side, then I'm just going to go around with my index finger and I'm going to push my finger this way and use these two fingers to make a little notch. Okay, so there's pie shell. Okay, really, really easy. If you're doing, ooh, sorry, I think I just stepped on the microphone. If you're doing a pie that, like a cream pie that you're not going to bake the filling in, I should have brought some beans to show you, but you're going to blind bake. Do you all know what that is? You're going to blind bake the shell. You're going to chill this first. And you can even wrap these and put these in the freezer as well. And I usually bake them from the frozen state because they have a tendency to not shrink as much. And the crust is a really nice golden brown. So what I would do is line this with a piece of parchment paper like this, and then fill this with, I use pinto beans at the bakery because you can use them over and over and over, or the cool old ceramic, pie beans that you can find. They're a little harder to find, but pinto beans are really cheap. And so you would fill this and bake this, and then remove the beans and the paper when it's cool, and then put your cream in and finish the pie. Yeah, I fill it right about to the edge. I bake mine around 375 degrees. If you bake them at a really cool temperature, then the butter has a tendency to kind of melt in there, and the crust isn't going to be as nice and brown. So, till it's done. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that because each oven is calibrated differently, but you just want to make sure. And so say for instance, I pull this out of the oven with the beans and I peel this back a little bit and it's still sticking to the dough, it's not finished. And you'll notice too that the edges will certainly bake more quickly than the bottom. But what you can also do is you can dock the bottom before you put the beans in, just like this, make a few holes to let evaporation out. And then you can remove the beans, pop it in a hot oven for just a couple minutes and bake the bottom. Because there's nothing worse than a soggy bottom. But for like an apple crumble, the filling would go right into this cold shell. Does that make sense? Okay. So what I was going to tell you too is sometimes you have shrinkage on your dough. So we'll just use this little scrap and I'll just show you because this is kind of important. If you don't lift and turn and pull the dough it needs to relax back. Well, it's easier to show you. And this will probably shrink back because it's been rolled before. But see how, this dough is not as elastic as the first round. It's not as forgiving. And it'll give you a little more trouble.
put the beans in? I don't get that.
Hey, I didn't explain that very well. The beans put pressure on the dough. If you just baked it like this, you would come out with a dough. It would almost look like a sopapilla. Exactly. And just to pierce the bubble doesn't work. You actually need to weigh the pastry down. Does that make sense? So this is what I mean by shrinking. If you just, it's going to roll out and then it's going to come back. I'm not quite sure how, other than just by seeing it, but you need the dough needs to relax and come back a little, if you will.
Now, if you refrigerated that, would it help it? Like if you had that left over and you said, you know what, tomorrow I'm gonna finish making another.
Oh yeah, you can, I mean, you can keep the scraps, you can even put them in your freezer.
And then would it help it better when it rolls out the next?
Well, it'll probably still shrink because even with the rolling, you're developing the gluten.
Okay.
So you're developing some structure in the dough. But certainly, yes. And if I get busy at the bakery or all the ovens are on and we're answering the phone and doing all this, the dough will get warm and I will have to return it to the oven, or excuse me, the refrigerator quite often. Sometimes it takes me all day to roll out pies. But this is a fairly forgiving, but you want to lift it and give it a little breathing room to come back. Does that make sense? This is the 20 ounces. So I'm wanting to say it's at least 3 cups. And another important thing, you don't want to use a liquid. This is a liquid measuring cup. You don't want to use liquid for volume. I mean, it's for liquid volume, but it's not for dry volume. So just the stacking measuring cups, the nesting like plastic cups you can find anywhere, those are the best things to use. So also when you're measuring, like I did with the salt and the baking powder, when you're measuring flour or any dry ingredient really, you want to make sure that you, and sometimes with cakes, you'll sift it and then you'll sift it into a measuring cup, which is different than sifted. It can be a little crazy, but so a bench scraper or just a spatula, but this is a dip and sweep method, which is very easy. Does that make sense? Okay.
I'm curious, what would be the cost of your ingredients?
Oh my, I should know that. Owning a business. The butter and the cream cheese certainly are going to be your most expensive. You know, and pastry flour is a little bit more expensive than all-purpose, but not so much. I would say, I mean, not even a couple dollars. That's without the filling. Yeah. So.
So why don't you use Crisco? You always see things.
I just prefer, I don't think Crisco has any taste. I mean, it's certainly easier to work with and it has a lower melting point than butter, but there's just nothing like butter. And if I'm gonna make a pie, right, and eat the pie, I want some butter. What else?
Does butter generally make it flakier?
Yes.
So what I'm after is that flaky crust that people die.
And you'll find too, with the addition of the cream cheese, it's a really nice complement to the butter.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, you can make it whatever way you choose. If you prefer Crisco or lard, by all means. But I just prefer, you know, unsalted butter. Yes.
So that I don't make pie very much, but I help my nephew, because he loves pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving. But by the time you get the pumpkin done, the edges are all burned.
Well, you know, they may sell these. It's a little metal rim like this that you can put over the edge. You can also just make a little foil ring to place around the crust, which helps. A little egg wash too. like a little bit of yolk with either some heavy cream or some water will add some nice browning effect on the pastry too. It's a little hard with a pumpkin pie because you don't want it to, you know, kind of seep into the filling. But the addition of egg will always make for a nicer, browner crust too. So, yeah.
Do you let it
Bake a while and then put this special. Put it on there right away.
Yeah.
Hold it in.
Mhm.
Stuff. Those are great.
Yeah.
So do you do anything different for turnovers?
No, I mean, I always brush those with an egg wash too. And I don't have a little, well, I could show you a little kind of a turnover shape. It's easy. So for instance, we'll improvise here. I always use a plastic lid. It seems so rudimentary, but those things work when you have them in your kitchen, and why not recycle them? So like a sour cream lid, a larger container, or a yogurt lid or something, whatever size you want, you just cut in, and then I would stretch the turnover just a little, and then I would fill it with whatever I'm filling it with. Some more dough. And then in my left hand, I just bring it up. Yeah. And crimp it. And you really want to not be a wimp when you're crimping these edges, because you want it to become one layer of pastry, not two. If it's two layers, it's going to come apart in the oven. So do you know what I mean by that? Like having it one. And then I would go around with my fork and just crimp these. And with my turnovers, I always make a couple little slits in the top so that the moisture can evaporate. And then I glaze them with egg and a little bit of water. Just egg yolk, not the white. And turbinado sugar is really nice. Or even just plain old granulated sugar. And I always bake these from a chilled state too. And they're really easy. And apple turnovers, oh my gosh, in the fall there's like nothing better with some ice cream. So what else? Yes?
The surface that you're using up there to roll on, is it wood? Or
It is wood. And it's not treated, which, you know, there are so many things in terms of bacteria or foodborne illness or what the health department says or my grandma used this board for 60 some years and not one of us ever got sick. At the bakery I have big pastry tables that are treated, oil treated wood. I mean, you could roll out on a countertop, on a stainless steel, on granite, anything. Granite's great because it's always kind of chilly. But you know, if you take good care of these and wash them really well and bleach them and let them air dry, untreated wood is, by me, is okay.
So I bought one of those the pastry mats, the rubberized pastry mat, because I was having problems with the dough sticking, but since you've gone through all this, I realized there's so many steps that I didn't do, so maybe that's why.
Well, no, that's great. And are you talking about a Silpat?
I did right.
Are you talking about one of the Silpat mats?
Yes.
And those are terrific. But
I love it, but I realized I didn't chill some of the other things.
okay.
Before I started rolling it out, it's like, duh.
Yeah, and then it needs to rest too. But those are great. I don't use them as much for pastry as I kind of do for other applications. But they're terrific, and they're easy to clean, and yeah, they're wonderful. Just don't ever fold them, because the fibers break down. So you always just want to keep those. Yeah, if you fold them, they'll crease, and then those will break down over time. And exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's perfect.
What kind of cream cheese do you use?
Just Philadelphia. The good stuff. What else? This is fun. I like to answer more questions if I can.
Baking temperature for just a plain shell?
I bake mine usually around 375. that can be a little hot in some, but I have a convection oven too, big convection oven, so a fan is always circulating. 350 might work. 400 is getting a little hot. Like you may have burned edges before you have, a cooked bottom.
And then for like how long for a normal, like 9-inch?
I would say between 20 and 30 minutes if you're blind baking. But you don't want to overdo it either if you're going to put filling in and then put it in the oven again. So it's just something you kind of have to play around with. And I always turn things, regardless of having a convection oven, I always have a hot spot. And in our ovens, it's the back right corner. And so I have to turn things all the time.
So when you put filling in, do you bake the shells a little bit first, or are you just going to put the fruit filling in there?
For fruit pies, I put it in like this. But for a cream pie, chocolate cream pie, I would always bake it, blind bake it first. So, and the old blackbirds? Do you remember the little ceramic blackbirds? I was given an old one by a dear friend, and I just don't want to use it. It's so pretty. But that's all. Those were also to allow steam to come out of the pie. So, anything else? Yes.
For a regular recipe that you read, what do you allow for high altitude baking?
That's such a good question because I've been baking here, which I guess is considered high altitude, right?
Mile high.
Yeah, forever. And I just don't ever adjust anything.
Yeah, we've had a lot of problems.
Really?
What we've done is add 25 degrees.
Excuse me?
Add 25 degrees, like a 350, take it to 375.
To 375?
And it bakes all the way through.
Right.
And we live in Canyon, we're just a little bit higher than
Oh,
you guys are
okay.
here, but in our oven, we've even bought oven temperature things to make sure that they're right on the money. They're right on the money, but
But it's that
yes,
that little
doesn't
elevation
quite get
jump.
cooked all the way through, or it's not that pretty brown golden crust.
Right.
And that's with everything. I mean, it could be lasagna.
Oh,
And
really?
I've got to add the extra
Extra
degrees,
temperature.
extra temperature to make it for the high altitude.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
I don't think anybody knows that.
Yeah, it's very odd because I cooked at sea level for so long. And I mean, I even cooked in the Arctic Circle and used some of my same recipes. So you may have to adjust flour too and moisture content, but yeah, I should do a little more.
And then
Research.
I have one question.
Yes.
When you asked about this original recipe, you said this made about 6.
I think it might make more than 6.
Is it like 6 top and bottom, or is it like?
Well, when I say 6, I'm just meaning this. So, let's see. I would say, boy, I wasn't prepared. That's a good question.
Was made with this recipe,
No, I made a bigger batch. Everything's bigger at the bakery. But I mean, a wedge like this is going to certainly give you enough. Because see all the extra I had? Just from that little piece I rolled out, all of this.
You might get 6 to 8 out of that.
Yeah.
So it'd be like 6 shells.
Yeah. I would say at least 6 to 8. And then if you wanted top crust or lattice, then of course it would be a few less. What else? Any more questions? So everyone's going to go home this weekend and bake a pie?
No, but I have a comment.
Of course.
I have a helper, and he absolutely loves doing pie crust.
That's awesome. Great.
Do all the stuff, but he does the crust.
And then do you clean up too? Awesome. Yeah, you're welcome. It was great fun.